It was autumn. The mist lay across the ground like a grey sheet, and the air was damp and cold. Ihor, Katya, and Maxim stood at the edge of the field that separated the city from the old, abandoned monastery. Once a refuge for monks and nuns, it had long since fallen into ruin, and no one dared to visit it. The locals said that the monastery wasn't closed without reason. Every now and then, people heard strange sounds coming from there, saw flickering lights, and felt an inexplicable pull, as if something dark and sinister resided within. "Ready?" Ihor asked, smiling with a barely concealed thrill. "Ready," Katya replied, though a hint of anxiety was evident in her voice. Maxim, the bravest of the three, nodded calmly, though there was something in his eyes that betrayed a hidden tension. All three sensed that tonight would be special, that perhaps the legends were not just tales meant to scare the townsfolk. But the thirst for adventure drove them forward, pushing them to ignore the warnings. They set out toward the old building, gripping their flashlights tightly, though their beams seemed feeble in the endless sea of fog. The closer they got, the denser the mist became until they saw the monastery only a few meters away. Its grey stone walls gleamed under the dim moonlight that hid behind thick clouds. The windows were dark and empty, like black holes that swallowed any light. When they reached the main entrance, Katya looked at the ancient door, barely hanging on rusty hinges. "Wow, it's still standing," she whispered. "Yes, as if it's waiting for us," Maxim replied, his voice echoing off the walls and disappearing into the depths of the monastery. Ihor opened the door and stepped in first. Inside, it smelled of dampness and decay. Darkness swallowed everything, and the flashlights barely cut through it, casting long, ghostly shadows. The monastery was vast, with high ceilings, and the echo of their footsteps was eerie, like the footsteps of invisible beings. From the first step, Ihor noticed symbols carved into the walls, almost erased by time. They looked like ancient signs, something akin to wards, but sinister and unnerving. Candles, long since extinguished, stood on the floor, and black wax remnants were scattered around them, resembling dried blood. Suddenly, Maxim felt something pulling him downward, as if invisible hands had grabbed his legs. He screamed, and Katya and Ihor immediately rushed to him. Their fingers slipped over his arms, but they couldn't pull him out of the dark circle on the floor. At that moment, something grabbed onto them as well. A force held them firmly, as shadows thickened around them. "Ihor! Katya!" Maxim screamed, struggling against the terrifying sensation that his body was being seized by something unknown. The shadows began to move, like ghostly figures, their outlines stretching and shifting, and a quiet whisper filled the air, gradually growing louder, like voices from another world. Each sound, each word, merged into an indistinct hissing, but they could understand that these were curses. Katya felt her heart start beating faster, each thud echoing in her ears, drowning out all other sounds around them. Finally, when they managed to break free from the shadows, all three collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. But before they could recover, a figure emerged from the darkness. It was a tall man in black, with a gaunt face and hollow eyes. He looked at them as if staring directly into their souls. "You did not come here to leave," he whispered in a voice that merged with the echoes of their own fears. The three students froze in terror. They tried to stand up, to run, but their legs refused to move. A cold, sharp fear gripped their chests, like a blade. They realized that this man was not just a spirit, he was something far worse, more terrifying. It was as if he was part of the very darkness that lived within the monastery, guarding it and punishing those who dared to disturb its peace. Katya fell to her knees, struggling to breathe, but the air felt poisoned, each breath growing painful. She felt her consciousness beginning to fade, and with her last strength, she turned to Ihor. "We have to get out of here," she whispered. Ihor took her hand, and lifting Maxim, they started back toward the exit. But the way back seemed endless. Every corridor they had passed now seemed different. The walls began to close in, the ceiling to lower, as if the monastery were trapping them. The light from their flashlights dimmed, as though swallowed by the darkness. They noticed blood stains on the floor, leading to an old part of the monastery. Not understanding why, but as if obeying an unknown call, they headed there. Inside, the room was full of ancient books and scrolls, covered in dust, and on the floor lay a large book, its pages stained with dark spots. Maxim approached the book and, after reading a few lines, realized it was a book of curses written in a language he could barely understand. But with each word he read, he felt his body grow heavier, as if a spell was taking hold of him. "What is this?" Katya whispered, looking at the book in Maxim's hands. Ihor tried to pull it from his friend's hands, but felt something cold and sticky touch his own. The shadows came alive again, enveloping them, and a quiet voice whispered from the depths of the room. "You cannot escape. You are now a part of this place, and it is now your curse." Trying to break free from the monastery, they found themselves back in the corridor, but it already looked completely different. The doors and windows had disappeared, and the walls were black-red, as if covered in dried blood. They realized they were trapped.